Exploring Washington State podcast. Here's your host, Scott Cowan.
So, hey, everybody, this is Scott with Exploring Washington State. And today my guest is Professor Nick Zentner at Central Washington University. And Nick, why don't you introduce yourself? You'll do better than I will.
Well, thanks, Scott. It's a pleasure to be with you. I met you, what was it, 2 minutes ago?
It's been a long time.
I teach geology here at the college in Ellensburg. I understand you went to the school for a while.
Yes, yes, I did.
Before I was here, I arrived in 1992, and I'm kind of the old man of the department now, and I'm chugging along with my teaching. But I've been doing more and more public outreach type things, kind of most of it just for myself. But it's kind of gotten hardwired into my job description as well. So I'm teaching, and I'm also doing a variety of things for the public, and it's a real pleasant thing.
So what got you started doing the public outreach, if you will? What was the inspiration there?
It's a good question because it's not a common thing in my world, my academic world. You know, there's very set rules when you work at a university, especially if you have a PhD, which I do not. I stopped at a master's degree because I kind of saw where the PhD world would be heading for me, which was a rather kind of confined and rigid world. And I just had a natural interest in communicating this amazing geology stuff to a broad audience. I felt like that was just missing. Even early on when I was a student, I just thought, well, I'm sure people would love to hear about this. And especially before the internet or programs like yours or websites like you're running, it was just, there was no effort put in, very little effort to put into communicating what science is. So that was always in the back of my mind. And then one thing led to another, and here we are.
So because we met 2 minutes ago, or now it's been 4 minutes ago. We've doubled our time together.
Feels like 1 minute.
Yeah. So last night I happened to, probably near the end of your live stream, pop on, and you were at Saddle Rock in Wenatchee, up walking around. And I live right by there, and yet I've not climbed to where you are yet. So here you are, you're out, you're doing a live stream while hiking, which I applaud you for, because the paramedics would be pulling me off the mountainside because I need to get more. But you live in the center of the state. Yeah. It's pretty easy to get to anywhere in our state from Ellensburg.
Correct.
And so that's, to me, kind of an interesting point about the Wenatchee and Ellensburg area, is that, really we're 3 hours away from just about anything, from the ocean, Mount Rainier to the plains. And I'm looking at your Seattle Times. There's a Seattle Times article that was done in 2017, and you're sitting in front of Elephant Mountain lava flow. East of Ellensburg. Where is that? Just help me with that. Where is that at?
It's one of my favorite places. It's called the Drumheller Channels. So the nearest little town is Othello. So south of Moses Lake, kind of northwest of Othello, and it's otherwise known as the Columbia Wildlife Refuge. But it's protected land, and it is a very important place geologically. It's where a guy named J. Harlan Bretz 100 years ago was out walking around on foot and was finding all this amazing evidence for a tremendous flood during the Ice Age. And he started publishing his papers in the 1920s. And he was an academic. He worked at the University of Chicago. He had all this amazing field evidence. And for most of his life, nobody believed him that there was an Ice Age flood. And Drumheller Channels, that place with those crazy rock columns and these potholes. And if people know O'Sullivan Dam, or they go out to Mardon and they're fishing, it's just to the south of there. It's one of my favorite places, and it's one of many, many very unique places, as you say, not very far away from us here in Central Washington.
Right. I mean, it's pretty fascinating. I drive, so I know very little about this topic. So, but I want to ask you. So I drive out to Cooley Dam, and so I go out Banks Lake. What would you call that? What is that right there? Is it, anyway, it looks very strange to me. It does not look like it belongs to the state's topography at all. It looks, I almost feel like, it's what happened there? And help me out because I'm stumbling over my words, but
This is perfect.
that area.
You are a natural geologist right here, Scott, because all it takes is a certain eye to go, well, this place looks weird. I wonder what happened here. And that's just the beginning. And then if you take some geology classes, or now you're able to watch live streams or geology videos or read papers on your own, you can kind of teach yourself. The drive from basically Coulee City up to Coulee Dam, you're going up through the upper Grand Coulee, and that valley is also famous because of its shape. The floor is perfectly flat, the walls are perfectly vertical, and for a long time, geologists would visit that place and go, what in the hell happened here? I don't understand. This is not like the Wenatchee River Valley. This is not like the Columbia River Gorge down by Portland. This is not like someplace over by Spokane. And again, it's an Ice Age flood story. The Dry Falls, I know you maybe stop and use the restroom at Dry Falls or buy yourself an ice cream cone or whatever. I don't know what your route is to go from Wenatchee up to Coulee Dam. What is your route? Do you stop at Dry Falls?
Typically, no, I've never been to Dry
okay.
Falls. So when I go, typically I go up Wenatchee, I go to Waterville.
Yeah, okay.
Was that Highway
Yeah.
2? Yeah. So I go Highway 2 to Coulee
Okay.
City, and then I just follow it along up to Coulee Dam,
Well,
Electric City.
Dry Falls is about a mile south of Coulee City. So if you just hang a right on State Route 17, you basically hang a right from that area and start heading towards Soap Lake. There's a pull out there, and for many people, especially going north-south, that's an obvious place to stop. It's called Dry Falls State Park. And Dry Falls is where there used to be a huge waterfall, as the name implies. And so a series of Missoula floods came down through the upper Grand Coulee where Banks Lake is today. That used to be a dry valley. There were orchards there back 100 years ago, et cetera. But back 15,000, 16,000 years ago, there was amazing amounts of Ice Age floodwater coming down. And the whole point is, those are two places now, Drumheller Channels and now the Banks Lake kind of Grand Coulee, where you have a very specific geology story that is awe-inspiring and captures people's imagination. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, no pun intended. So we can go, your canyon, there's a story there. Saddle Rock, where I was hiking last night above Wenatchee, there's a specific story there. Mount Stewart, rock that came from Mexico. I mean, it's...
What? Wait, stop. Mount Stewart, rock that came from Mexico.
I thought I'd flip that one in there. You're
No. You're gonna please share. How do we get rock from Mexico? I don't understand.
You haven't tuned me out yet. That's good. You're a good host. I mean, some of these stories are almost impossible to absorb at first listen. There was a geology professor at Western over in Bellingham in the late 1960s, and he started banging around on the granite of Mount Stewart and the Stewart Range and the enchantments. Are you familiar where I'm talking now?
I am familiar with the enchantments.
Good.
Yes.
So his name was Merle Beck, and Merle started sampling that granite and studying the alignment of the magnetic minerals that are in the granite. So the granite of Mount Stewart and the rest of the Stewart Range is 93 million years old. And so that means that it used to be molten magma underground, and it cooled slowly into form this granite. But the magical thing is, you can study a granite paleomagnetically, make these measurements with this magnetite mineral, and determine the ancient latitude on the Earth where that granite actually cooled, went from liquid to solid. And so you go, okay, well, I'm sure his answer must have been, 47 degrees north latitude like we are now. Well, it turns out it was 23 degrees north latitude, which is present-day Baja, Mexico. And so he started publishing papers saying, look, this granite that's now in the enchantments actually formed in Mexico and then was moved gradually by San Andreas fault-like earthquakes almost 2,000 miles to come up here in frickin' Chelan County. And everybody said the guy was nuts. And here we are 40, 50 years later, 40 years, I guess, approaching 40. No, it was his first paper was in 1970. So yeah, 50 years ago.
50 years
and
ago,
now there's a whole bunch of evidence, not just that paleomagnetic evidence, to confirm that that in fact is true, that there are many locations in Western Washington in particular, Swakane biotite and ice, just north of Wenatchee, that what is it, Birch Mountain? You go up kind of in that subdivision just north. I'm struggling with Easy Street.
Easy Street, yes, Easy
Right,
Street.
you go north
yes.
of Easy Street, and that prominent peak north of Wenatchee, that is stuff that was way down south and got moved. I mean, it's so you can get people pretty easily into this geology world that if those that took a geology class long ago, it's a science class, and here's what the definition of an andesite lava. It's all this kind of names, and you're learning a foreign language, and there's not a whole lot of captivating stuff. But I and many of others have kind of fallen into this visual story type approach, which is based in science, but it can grab a whole bunch of people, not just kind of science nerds.
Okay, so if the Stuarts,
well, he's processing now. This is good. I can see it.
If the Stuarts were formed in Baja, what we know as Baja,
right,
and now they're here, wouldn't that mean that all the rocks between there and the Stuarts would have been pushed up as well? I mean,
yes.
Okay, so it's not
one isolated little patch of ground.
Okay.
So the concept is called Baja BC. If you Google Baja BC geology, you'll find a whole sorts of papers and stuff. So most of the land that was originally in Baja is now in BC, British Columbia. And we're just, the trailing edge of this block of material. But the trick is,
and how many years ago?
Well, that's the whole thing. So you have to be in a particular window of time for this story to work. And so folks that kind of take the bait with this, now they're going, oh God, they're looking at I see Baja BC everywhere. I was fly fishing, I saw Baja. No. So it's between 85 and 60. Between 85 and 60 million years ago is when this 2,000 miles of movement happened. And you're well, let me grab a napkin here. Let me pencil this out. Is this even possible? And you start.
I've got my notepad over here, and you can't really see me, but I'm quietly trying to jot down things.
Good. Yeah, you have to scan your notes and send it to me. I'll grade it for you.
Oh, great.
But the idea is that we have known land shifting measurements on the San Andreas Fault in California. Each time there's a big earthquake on a segment of the San Andreas Fault, the west side of the fault shifts north 10, 15 feet compared to the other side. Oh. So if you've got 25 million years worth of time and you do these little San Andreas Fault-like earthquakes one at a time, you really can move crust that much, that far.
Yeah.
And so, so are we keeping track now? We got a couple Missoula floods things, which is like.
So what's a Missoula flood? Because I'm thinking Montana.
As you should. So during the Ice Age, the glaciers were huge. There was an ice sheet covering all of Canada. That ice got down into northern Washington, and it ponded a bunch of water in western Montana. We call it Glacial Lake Missoula. And so many of the valleys of western Montana were under standing water, and there was an ice dam in northern Idaho. If you know Sandpoint or Lake Pend Oreille, that's kind of ground zero for that.
Okay.
And then there was finally enough water in Glacial Lake Missoula to break the ice dam, and there was a catastrophic draining of the water in Montana, and that water came down the Grand Coulee. That water came through Drumheller channels, and we know there were dozens of these floods. It didn't just happen once.
Okay.
So Scott, one of the recipes here you've already gotten to be kind of into this, and that is some of these places. You've done that drive up to Coulee Dam. You've I don't know, whatever, you're driving to the store or something else, and you see. So these places are landmarks that many of us know quite well, and so you're already interested in the topic because I'm talking about these places. You have maybe some personal history, and then if you throw in a couple of these stories with some new ways to think about it, it really grabs folks.
So I grew up in the Tacoma area, and so as a kid in the 60s and 70s, because everything revolves around the west side of the state. The east side doesn't exist. But we really just think of the Cascades. We just think of Baker, Rainier, St. Helens, and all of that, and then St. Helens did her thing in 79 or 80,
1980.
And when I came over to college into Ellensburg, it looks very different in Ellensburg than it does in Western Washington. And then driving around in my, the Ellensburg area has, Menashtash and going down to Yakima to the Yakima Canyon and all of that. I didn't get out much when I was in college because I was a college kid. But now, driving, say, from home in Wenatchee down to Tri-Cities, that's kind of an interesting.
Sure it is.
Going back across into Western Washington and looking, say, at, and I'm drawing a blank as to what the mountain is in the Olympics. It's not really a mountain. They call it a mountain, but it's, I think, 8,000. Well, it's 8,000. What is it? It's just, so to me, the topography of the state of Washington is radically different wherever you go. And it's kind of a very interesting and very diverse place. Your Disneyland reference is actually like, yeah, I can kind of see that. But I guess my thought, my very layman's thought, was always that somehow the Columbia River was the key to all of this. And I don't know. I mean, what do you mean about the Columbia and how it's meandered across the state, and what has it done? And how does that impact anything, or does it?
There's another story with another set of ideas. So the Columbia, as we understand it today, has really no impact on Western Washington. But as far as Eastern Washington is concerned, the Columbia itself is truly older than much of the ridge country that you see.
Oh.
And that's backwards from the way most people would think of it. They think, oh, well, the ridge must have been there forever. And then, oh, the Columbia River's like going right through the ridge. Well, I guess the river must have found a weak spot in the ridge. Like, let me give you an example. Like, Sentinel Gap is just south of Vantage, and the Columbia River heads right for that ridge south of Vantage, and it goes right through the frickin' ridge. And you're like, gee, I wonder how, if you're thinking like this, you think, well, I wonder what happened there. Well, we have great evidence to prove that the Columbia River was there when the whole Eastern Washington was perfectly flat, and that those ridges weren't there. So the river was there first, and then the ridges started growing, again, earthquakes, to uplift that crust and make saddle mountains rise on both sides of the Columbia. Or I could use an example more close to your home. Same story with no, that's not true. The Yakima River Canyon, which you mentioned, same idea. Is this crazy curving river, the Yakima River between Ellensburg and Yakima, and the canyon road, therefore, is this crazy looping. If you look on a map, that canyon is squirrely, but it's cutting right across these ridges. So the river was there first, and then the ridges grew on opposite sides.
You see, if you would have asked me that question, was the river there first, or was the river? I would have. Guarantee you, I would have lost that.
I think most would. I think I probably would have before I started studying how you can kind of read the landscape, and that's kind of what we do here. I remember one of my first geology field trips. I'm from Wisconsin, so I'm here on purpose. This is a choice to be here because of all this great stuff. And I'm Wisconsin was a great place to grow up, but I remember my first true field trip was with a glacial geology professor at the University of Wisconsin, and we were all in this, um, kind of like an A&A motor coach kind of a thing. So he's got the microphone up there in the front, and we're driving around southern Wisconsin, and he's talking the entire time. And he's like, well, you look over there, you got that hill. So the ice was there, and then here's this Ice Age river that went through that. And he was talking about these places I've driven around my whole, first 18 years of life. I'd never thought about it. And it was like he had magical glasses on or something where he could see all this stuff, and none of us could see anything. And I'm like, I'd like to learn how to do that. That guy is seeing a whole different world, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. Now, let me ask you a question, Scott. Okay. What's the name of this podcast and the site that you are working so hard on?
Sure. The podcast name is Exploring Washington State, and the website, believe it or not, is called Explore Washington State.
Now, is this something that you started recently?
The podcast, absolutely, yes. Depending on when this is released, it will be in the first 10 episodes. So yes, you're very early in the evolution of this the podcast. Nice. Yeah, exactly. And the site's been going since 2017.
Okay. What was your motivation to get that rolling?
Oh, I hate this question. The motivation was in 2017. I still am. I'm a real estate broker, and the point was we were going to spin up these little explore Ellensburg, explore Tacoma, and we're going to spin up all these little sites with the hope that people would go to find out more about Tacoma because they were thinking to move there. And then lo and behold, there'd be real estate ads for them to click on, and they would buy houses from us. And I didn't feel good about that. Wow. I just, we don't get me started on my industry. Let's just say I've been doing a very specific niche of real estate for a decade plus now, and it doesn't need me to get buyer leads. So one of my assistants said to me, well, hey, why don't we, instead of doing it by the city, why don't we just do the whole state? And I did a quick Google, or I went on to GoDaddy and looked, and literally the domain Explore Washington State had literally just expired, and I purchased it. So we started doing that, and it's morphed around a little bit, and now the team and I have three editors who put the articles together. We have people that contribute content to us. And then my daughter runs our Instagram. People, that's typically where people find us, is on Instagram. And she lives in Europe, and it's kind of fun that she gets to work for me from Europe. So she's raising her children and is getting to stay in touch with home because it's her job.
Very cool.
So we do this. And so the basic premise of it is that Washington State's a pretty amazing place. I don't think we need another article about the Space Needle. You can find, and nothing wrong with the Space Needle, no disrespect, I hear you. So let's talk about things that you don't inherently know just because you live in Washington State. So we don't need to necessarily talk about the Space Needle, even Mount Rainier. I mean, it's a beautiful mountain. I do kind of miss seeing it because I grew up in its shadow, but it's really well documented. You don't need a lot of cheerleaders for that, but let's talk about interesting little places, people that are doing interesting things. Let's find people like yourself. I mean, like I said, when we started this, I didn't know who you were, but when we sent out a request to our fans, your name came up, and I'm like, who is this guy? And it was like, and you're prolific though. I mean, how do you create so much content? Because you're like, last night you were live on Saddle Rock, and I'm going to guess you're going to do something. You're here with us now, and then maybe later today you're going to go do something else. How do you do
it? Specifically, this project came about because of the pandemic.
Okay.
So we're in mid-March, and everything's shutting down for all of us. Of course, not just in Central Washington. We're talking about the world pretty much. And
Yes.
I had been, I get a lot of feedback from folks from the other kind of projects that I have, and they kept saying, "Why don't you do live streaming? That would be kind of fun." I'm like, "I don't know how to do that. I don't know. Maybe I will. I don't know." And anyway, when all this stuff kind of happened in mid March, and suddenly my calendar was absolutely open, which unnerved me. I like to stay busy and productive, and I'm like, "Good Lord, I got what am I looking at here? The next 4 months or 4 weeks, I'm not doing anything." So I taught myself. I'd read a little bit. I sent out some stuff on social media. What should I? I'm thinking seriously about live streaming for the first time. Should I go Facebook Live or Instagram Live or YouTube? And they said, "Well, I think you got a YouTube channel, don't you?" I'm like, "I don't know. Maybe I do. I kind of forget." So uh, I decided to start live streaming using my my iPhone 11, and I think one of the surprises to many, but I guess not for me anymore, is that people want to connect. I'm
Yeah,
not even
absolutely.
sure it matters we're talking about geology. They want to connect with a community. And if you're screwing around, fumbling around, something just fell, the audio isn't working, you're getting real time help from people during these live streams. That just bonds you more with who's watching. And so I started doing these things from my backyard, and then I started having guests over in my backyard when we went to move to phase 2 here in Kittitas County. And then
Okay.
again, people are like, "Hey, well, why don't you? This is working. Why don't you go out and do a field trip?" So I did a big hike over at Frenchman Coulee, and that worked pretty much. And then I was up on Saddle Mountain last night. And tomorrow morning, I'm actually going to be back over in your area with a very special guy, Randy Lewis. I guess this will be posted later, huh? But
Be a little
yeah,
later.
so so by the time your folks hear this, will be after the fact. But Saturday morning, June 6th, I'm going to be live streaming with Randy Lewis, who's a magical guy, Native American who lives in Wenatchee and knows all the old stories. And it's a rare treat to,
Oh wow, that'll be awesome.
yes, I'm looking very much forward to that one. So it's like most of the things I've done, there's no plan. I just kind of am willing to try new things. And whether it's TV or YouTube lectures or this sort of thing, it's all just and it makes me feel like I'm productive and helpful to people, and there's just a certain joy to the whole thing.
Well, you're a great ambassador for
Thank you.
Central. I think that you're out there, and your willingness, and you're so prolific. The byproduct of that is that Central is being given more brand awareness, if you will. And, second of all, you're a great ambassador for the state of Washington, because the stories that you've shared so far, just, I've lived here all my life, and I had no clue.
Well, thank you for that, Scott.
And then I watched, once again, let me reemphasize, we met 30 minutes ago.
ago.
I I watched one of your videos last night. I don't know which one it was. You were in your backyard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Somebody sent you a box.
Oh,
And you opened a box up. So before I continue, I'd like to ask you how. I'm going to guess that that's not the first box you've received from people.
no.
How did that come about that people are mailing you things?
Well, over the years, there's been a lot of effort to monetize what I'm doing. I work with producers of a PBS program for television, and they're like, "Oh, we got to get sponsors. We got to do this and that." I'm like, I'm not interested in that. And many of these other things I've been doing, and I'm just afraid of the money part of it. Now you're kind of you're a real estate guy, business guy. You kind of know your way around that world. I don't. I'm not trained that way. I don't. The whole thing just intimidates me, and I just want it to be as pure as possible. So I was very clear with the folks on this live stream. I mean, there's now 1,000 people watching every night from around the world. They're literally typing in comments from all these countries.
Last night, you're the first live stream that I've ever
Yeah,
watched that the comment
yeah.
thread was fluid. It was just
It's bizarre.
fluid. I was
Yeah, yeah.
shocked. Good
Well,
for you.
thanks. So to answer your question, so I was pretty clear up front. I want to do this. I don't want any kind of, people are, oh, do the super chat thing, monetize this. You can get, and I'm literally mocking all this advice I got. So, I have like fake sponsors. I'm like, this episode brought to you by Vinman's Bakery in Ellensburg. It's the whole show. And so, but yet many people, they want to give somehow, and they're like, okay, so this guy's not going to accept money or whatever. I'm gonna send them cookies, or I'm gonna drop off a bottle of wine. I'm gonna drive through on the way from Spokane, and I've been live streaming enough from my house. They kind of can figure out where I live, basically.
Well, Ellensburg's not that big of a place. Yes, I'm sure. Well, so this episode that I watched, and I didn't watch all of it. I was just watching part of it. You opened up a box, and in it were some rocks.
Right.
And honestly, my first thought was the shipping had to be horrible on that. Okay, that was my first thought. Then the next thought was you were reading the note from, it was a guy who sent you a card, and he said, please share the dark bottle. And you pulled out two bottles of beer, and one was a Corona, which you kind of smirked at, and the other was polygamy porter. And you started reading the label, and I'm thinking, this episode brought to you by Polygamy Porter. And your delivery was hysterical. I loved it. And then my mind went to, they mailed you rocks and glass bottles in the same package. That's where my mind went. And I just thought it was absolutely amazing that you've got this connection with people, and they're sending you things creatively. I don't know. I don't know what other boxes you've received. Maybe that was the coolest box you've ever gotten, or maybe it's pretty normal for you. But I thought your delivery of you didn't say this up. Maybe did you say this episode brought to you by? You kind of held it up, and I was just laughing. I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah. By this point, there's regulars, so there's a bunch of inside jokes and all sorts of other references to this, and there's kids watching, so I got to watch my mouth sometimes. So my mom's watching in Wisconsin. She's like scolding me the next day, So the whole thing's, unrehearsed, as real as possible. And I can't keep this up. I'm doing 5 of these a week. So I've been I don't know what it is now, approaching 60 of these live streams since mid-March. So I think we're going to start. I really don't know. I'm just going week to week, I guess, is what I'll say.
So I was going to ask you is that, at some point, the assumption is we're going to go back to, quote unquote, life as we knew it, we're going to be within 3 feet of each other, whatever. And you're going to go back into the classroom at some point. And so you're not going to have that abundance of time. But do you think that that's something that you will continue to do in some capacity, doing these live streams, maybe on the weekends, or
I think it would be foolish to just shut the thing down completely because of the numbers, the number of people involved. It's a positive thing. It's been a tonic for many as we struggle with all this stuff in the world, and so it's an escape. It's a connection. It's a community. So I know that I'll do something using kind of, now that I know what I'm doing. But I don't know what that is. I think if I try to live stream from my classroom, that could work, actually. Now that I think, if I don't have other people on film, I think there's some rules about you can't show students' faces. I don't know. I got to look into that.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's the latest example of, I just try to go for it. I don't take myself too seriously. If there's a bunch of, malfunction and this and that, I just kind of roll with it. I don't think people want, there's plenty of like polished professional whatever out there, and I think many are wanting something a little bit more real, and real oftentimes means completely goofy and just kind of a circus. It was a circus last night up on Saddle Mountain. We got wind and we're in the shade, and I've got a fan coming up in the middle of it and talking, you know,
Oh,
talking.
geez. So are you okay? So let me ask you this: are you being recognized now when you go out? I mean, do you have that? Have you hit that level of celebrity that hey, you're the guy from the live streams or you're the guy from YouTube?
Yeah, it's coming. It's happening more and more.
That's
It's
so funny.
nice. Yeah, it's it makes you, it just makes you feel good. People love learning. They love learning new things. They like to be kind of associated with a certain group of people who have a certain kind of momentum of their own. So
Right.
there's got to be content. I just can't be up there screwing around. So there's got to be some stuff we actually cover that is stimulating for them. So I make sure that there's a decent balance there.
Well, in our show notes, I'll make sure I link to your page and all that, and people can go and explore. And I would encourage them to do so because you're informative and entertaining. So I'll
Thank
give you
you.
that. So let me ask you. I'm put you on the spot for
Sure.
this question. So you call Washington State the Disneyland here for that. Where's your where's your favorite? What's your favorite place in as far as the Elephant Mountain lava
Right.
flow, or what's that place that you like? If I said you can only go to one more place, you can go back to one place, where would you go?
One answer would be Chelan.
Okay.
Chelan's. I even did a YouTube lecture a few years ago that people could find if they're interested. It's called Lake Chelan Geology. The intro to that lecture was if I made up a friend that I had on the East Coast, and I just called him Jerry. And I said,
Okay.
okay, well, Jerry says he's coming out to see all this geology he's been learning there, watching these programs. But he said, I only got one day. So take me to, show
Okay.
me as much as you can in one day. And I'm like, well, I guess I'd take him to Chelan because they've got these Missoula floods. They've got this incredibly deep lake. They've got this bizarre zebra looking rock that you see on 97A as you go up on the west side of the river. A big
Mhm.
earthquake fault, the biggest earthquake in Washington state history, 1872. We just found where that earthquake fault is. It's in Spencer Canyon, which is right across the river from Orondo.
Let me ask you. Let me stop you there. You just found the earthquake
Right,
fault. 150
right, right.
years later. How did you find how do we find faults like that? Please explain.
Well, one of the really cool things about geology is that there's always work to be done. There's always mysteries that are hanging out there. So it was December of 1872. There was a hell of an earthquake, probably estimated magnitude 7.4, somewhere between
Okay.
Chelan and Wenatchee. And nobody knew
Hmm.
exactly where the ground broke, but there were all these, there's white folks in the area in 1872, so they're writing down some of the reports. There's a couple of basic little newspaper accounts from the whole region. People are feeling this in Seattle, et cetera. This is a big earthquake. And so
Okay.
between 1872 and 5 years ago, we couldn't figure out where the actual fault was. Well, there's this new stuff called LIDAR where you can get very detailed images, aerial photographs essentially, but you can digitize it so that all the vegetation is removed magically. And so you can
Oh,
see real detailed images of land surfaces. And one of the geologists who works for the USGS was really trying to find this. We call it a scarp, a fault scarp, where the ground actually you could broke. You should still be able to see where the ground actually broke cleanly from 100+ years ago. And using the imagery, the LIDAR imagery, he said, well, God, we got to go up to that Spencer Canyon. I think I see something that might be the actual crack. So they went out, got permission, private land, blah, blah, blah. And then they thought it was. Then they took some samples. Then they got some radiocarbon dates from some of the organic material. End of story. They had enough field evidence to prove that really was the place that the ground broke. Now, the final part of the story is back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it was a political game. Oh, you want to build some dams on the Columbia? Well, there's no earthquake problems here. Oh, what about that 1872 thing? Oh, I'm sure I think that epicenter was over there in Western Washington somewhere. I mean, it's fascinating. Until you get good evidence, you can't be very clear about important decisions like that. So,
okay. So I interrupted Chelan though. So what else is in there in Chelan that you're Jerry's coming out? You're going to take him to Chelan.
Yeah.
Is there?
Hopefully Jerry has good hygiene habits, so we're going to be in the car all day together. The lake itself, Lake Chelan, is a battleground between two lobes of the ice sheet that came from Canada. So one lobe of the ice flowed west up the lake, and the other lobe of the ice came east down the lake, and they met. And so you've got ice sheet, you've got ice age floods coming down the Columbia and leaving these huge gravel bars. The bedrock itself is very unusual rock called migmatite that's usually formed 15, 20 miles below the surface, and yet it's at the surface. So there was an incredible amount of uplift. Oh, the list goes on and on. So Chelan would be one answer. Another answer would be Wenatchee, I have to say. There's much of what I just described also right there in Wenatchee. So you live in a very special place.
It was funny when our story when we moved over here is that I was tired of I was burning out. I was managing some real estate offices where I had 100 and some brokers that I was responsible for herding cats. And I was driving 30 miles each way to the office. And on top of that, I did my real estate space business. And my father, his health was deteriorating, and I wanted to spend more time with my mom and my dad. And my wife and I just started like, well, if we could leave, where would we go? And so my two places that I said I wanted to move to were Port Townsend or Ellensburg. Well, Ellensburg got voted out because it's too windy. Little did we know that Wenatchee's pretty windy too. But Ellensburg got voted out because of the wind. Port Townsend got voted out because of the rain and the west side dreariness. Okay. So we're visiting some friends of ours, and they're musicians, and they were playing it in Suncadia and Cle Elum, and at that time they lived in Kashmir, and some of their friends were talking to my wife, and they said, "Oh, you should come to Wenatchee. You should look at Wenatchee." And I'm like, I don't know if I might have gone to Apple Blossom when I was in college. I don't really remember. And so we came over here, and well, obviously, as the story ends, we bought a house. My mom and dad moved over here with us, and so I was able to spend the last few months of my dad's life, present and able to be there and do that. And then now mom lives with us, and we can keep an eye on her. And so it's been great for the family, and it's a really interesting place. And so I had no idea really. The criteria was we wanted to be a little more blue sky, and we needed good healthcare. And Wenatchee had remarkably good healthcare for a town of its size, and it's got blue sky, but no one told us about the wind. That's not in the brochures that they give you when they say move to Wenatchee. Because otherwise I might have been in Ellensburg. But like Saddle Rock. So since I live here and I'm going to monopolize the Wenatchee piece, do you know Saddle Rock? I don't know the history of it, but from a geology point, what happened there?
It's a developing story, and that was the point of my broadcast last night. Not a whole lot of work has been done on Saddle Rock or Castle Rock or Stemilt Spires or Wenatchee Dome, we call it, Rooster Comb, all these little kind of pinnacles in the area.
Right.
But the emerging story, and more work is needed, is that those are all those. Well, let's just pick Saddle. Saddle Rock is 44 million year old rhyolite lava. And you're like,
it doesn't look a year over 42, but okay.
But from our point of view, then you go, okay, well, let's see. What do I know about what's going on with plate tectonics in Washington 44 million years ago? And you're like, well, wait a minute. That's too old for the Cascades. That's way too old for Mount Rainier and Mount Baker and those others. So this is an old volcano story. Well, that's interesting. And then you go, well, wait a minute. The chemistry of the rhyolite is not like the rhyolites up in the Cascades. Plus, there's a bunch of gold associated with that rhyolite. I don't know if you're aware, but there was a huge gold operation right there at Saddle Rock.
I
The
did not know
Cannon
that.
mine and the Lovett mine, they pulled out millions of dollars worth of gold and silver, and they stopped that in the early 90s. And much of that Saddle Rock hiking area is kind of reclaimed mining land.
I do recall maybe that there was a cleanup
Yes,
going on up there.
yes,
Okay, so I didn't pay close enough
yeah.
attention. Okay, thank you.
So
That
that
filled me
so
in on the
from
back of
my
it.
point of view, one of the biggest remaining questions about the geology of central Washington is what exactly is the connection between the gold over at Liberty, Washington, over by Blewett Pass, and the
Mhm.
gold at Wenatchee, and even some of the gold up by Lake Cle Elum. You're heading up towards Ronald and Cle Elum, basically, and that's a whole seam of gold and igneous rocks that have similarities in ages and chemistries, but nobody's really been able to tie that all together. So I'm trying to convince some of the field geologists and some of the other experts to spend more time there because I think it would be a very interesting set of results.
That's very fascinating. So you just make sure I understood you. So you said that the Saddle Rock 45 million
Yep.
years old, and you mentioned then that it's older than Rainier and the Cascades?
Yes, generally the Cascade volcanoes have been there for about 40 million years, but individual mountains like Rainier are very young. Mount Rainier is 500,000 years old, and it's only been standing for 500,000 compared to
Oh,
the entire mountain range being 40 million years or so. So we kind of view the development of the history or the kind of construction of Washington as a state in different chapters, and that Cascade chapter is pretty late in the book. And I'm kind of giving you the message that the Saddle Rock and Wenatchee and Gold story is a couple chapters earlier than once we get to the Cascade story.
that's fascinating. Okay. All right. So, out of respect for your time, I mean, I could continue this conversation with you for much longer, but for respect for your
Okay.
time, so one of the things we always do is, we ask everybody, like, because we're all about Washington State. So, like, when you and the family want to go out, where do you guys like to go? What do you do when you're not climbing rocks and you're not live streaming? Um,
Well,
where in Washington do you guys go?
we love to go all across the Pacific Northwest. We hike, and we're not big gadget people, so we don't have a big boat and a big RV and everything else. We just have a couple knapsacks and some water filters, and my wife and I head out. And so we do enjoy the Teanaway area north of Ellensburg, and
Mhm.
um, just many hiking places here in kind of the rain shadow of the Cascades, depending on
Okay.
the time of year. And then we love to eat, of course. So there are some places. In fact, last night I came down off. Well, people watched the live stream, and there were some in Wenatchee who were watching, and so they came up to visit afterwards. So I'm hiking down, and there's some people that were hiking up to say hi. And one couple in particular said, "We drive all the way from Wenatchee to go to get a burger at Campus U Totem Burger in Ellensburg, Washington. Those are the best French fries in the state." I'm like, "You're kidding me? That's like 2 blocks from my house." And like, "We know. We watched the live stream. We know where you live.
That's
Campus U Totem."
both very cool and kind of can be
Yeah,
creepy at the
right.
same time.
So
Uh, Campus
yeah,
Totem. Oh my gosh, I haven't heard that. I haven't thought about that in a
no,
while. I'm kind of a super mother at the
okay,
Tav.
that
I
qualifies. That
I kind of like that. And back in the day, I really liked the Valley Cafe.
yeah,
I used to go there for when I was attending school. I'd go there for back then, coffee wasn't what it is today. So they had an espresso machine, which was kind of like outer worldly.
Yep.
But that was those. But the Tav, in fact, one of my college roommate lives in Seattle, and his father lives in Walla Walla, and they meet at the Tav for lunch to get together. That's their story. It's always funny because they'll post it on Facebook. We're at the Tav today, and yeah.
Well, there's different ways to measure success, but from my point of view, if you have an establishment where you have different generations there all the time, that's the Tav, that's Campus U Totem. I mean, it's that good that you don't have one demographic. You got everybody there, and that's a great part of the Tav story. I'll give you one brand new establishment here that is very exciting and has been around maybe a year or year and a half. The Red Pickle. And he just got out of a food truck, and he's now got an establishment here on 3rd Avenue. I think we're going there tonight. He just opened up again. Mario is, I think, Guatemalan or some Central American fare, so he's got an interesting kind of angle on burgers and other things, and tacos. It's a wonderful place.
So you can see me because we're doing this with kind of a video screen, but the audience can't see me making this kind of laughing face. My very first guest, Nicole, I was asking her this question, and she goes, "Oh, I'd love to go to the Red Pickle." And I'm like going, "Okay, what is it?" Now they're being recommended. I've got to go try it. I just think I'm just laughing because it's like, here we go. another recommendation for, which I love. I love the fact that a restaurant, a business is creating that sort of buzz and following that people want to go and say something like, hey, where do you go for dinner? Where do you like to go for lunch? You go, let's go here. And that's kind of, they're doing it right. The way
he's definitely doing it right. And it's old school. He greets everybody. They walk in, he comes to everybody's table, and the whole experience, really? Not only the food and he does specialty drinks. He's got a fancy bar there, but I'm an older guy. I like that personal touch, and he's committed 100%.
So, since we're giving him an unofficial plug, where in Ellensburg is the Red Pickle?
It is downtown Ellensburg. It's on 3rd Avenue. Let's see, the cross street is that Pearl Pine. I guess it's 3rd and Pine. And D&M Coffee used to be there, but they've moved to a different location. So it's the old D&M location, if people know that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. So if this episode's not, well, if this episode hasn't created questions in your mind, we probably missed the mark for the audience that haven't listened this far. But if they're still listening and they want to find more about you and what you're doing, where can they find you at?
I created a website called nickzentner.com. Actually, my name, nickzentner.com, because for a while, people were having a hard time finding all these different stuff that I'm doing, a podcast and the live streams and the PBS stuff and these old 2-minute geology episodes. So I put it all in one place. So nickzentner.com, got everything in one place.
Perfect. So I'll put that down in the show notes below this so people can click on it and find it. Thank you very much for your time. I've known you now an hour, and it's been a very enjoyable hour for me. I've learned more now. Not unfortunately, the reality is I have more questions now than I did an hour ago, which is kind of fun actually. So I've learned a lot, and it's a good day when I can learn something. I always think a good day when you learn something. So this has been awesome. So thank you very much for being on the show, and would love to have you on again if you're willing to give us some more of your time one of these days.
Thank you, Scott. It's been a real pleasure to be with you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, there is always more to explore. Take care.
Join us next time for another episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast.